Um, Ready? Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Sinclair, and with me, as always, is Curtis Jung. And
Good
this
day.
is not newsletter. This is webinar number 8, and we are going to talk about advanced routing. Actually, Curtis is going to talk about advanced routing, and
At least the advanced routing setups.
the setups and all that.
Yeah.
So, as soon as we're ready, as soon as Curtis is ready, we can go ahead and take it away, Curtis.
All right. All right. Okay. So you have to forgive us. It's a complex topic, so hopefully it won't be as random as it sounds. First of all, let's go to let's kind of talk a little bit about how events are set up to begin with. Um, when you get your CS3 or even your CS2. Not that we'll talk about that too often out of the box. So let me share my screen here. Whoops, wrong button. And yeah, let me know if there's any kind of technical issues, Rick. So
Yes, I will.
I am aware. Share. So there is a CS3 screen. That's our starter screen here. When you are dealing with events, and let's kind of program in, open up our events to begin with. And kick in. We'll just start up an event cycle here. So here we have an event channel. I can close this window so I can see what's going on my layout screen in the background. This is your step editor if you're not familiar with it. All events that you create are going to begin in manual mode, and that's this hand icon over here on the lower left where this button is. That means that you're activating all your events with a finger touch on the event screen. Um, However, working with automation events and whatnot. So when you have your event steps, you can drag in your items from your layout page, and it gets placed as the step announcements or the step of when your action occurs. So, for instance, this will be the first turnout is going to be activated. And then if I wanted to, I can activate a signal step. And this would be controlled manually. If you need to change aspects, you open up that window by clicking on the step and changing the position. Okay, and these are just basically out of the box controls. Now, what you're going to use normally is you would use contact tracks to trigger these events. And so let's kind of look at it. And this isn't going to make any logic on this script right now because I'm just kind of pointing out the features on how they work and apply. So the first thing here is, let's say K1, when it gets rolled over, is actually going to be what we call a trigger point. And that actually is going to replace our finger action on the manual mode. And you see I dragged it over the manual mode button here on the lower left. And you can see now that it is K1, the contact one, that's actually going to activate this script. Now, out of the box, there's ways where you can detect occupation. And I'll illustrate this by dragging K2, but this time I'm going to drag it into the step line here where the W1 and the signal is. And I'm just going to drag it in here random. You can see that over the left corner of that icon is a question mark. And that's what we call a condition. So what happens here is that if what you're asking the CS2 is, it's going to say, if this icon here is yellow, then it will allow the steps that follow to be triggered or create actions. You can see the order here is out of whack because you generally want to have this condition first. So you can drag this stuff around. Whoops, let me see if I can drag it around here. You see how it changes into a line. I'm going to try to move it all the way to the left. Now it's the first thing that happens. So essentially what happens is, and to put it verbally, when the train makes contact to K1, that's this yellow one here, because normally it's going to be gray. So when a train rolls over this contact, it will turn to yellow. And then what we're asking is, at this point, now we're following the script line. If K2 shows yellow, then it will switch the turnout to go to the right, and the depot signal would activate to green. If it isn't yellow, as in the picture, then it's not going to change the turnout, because it is what we call a false condition. It doesn't match what this icon signifies. And you can change this icon. If I click on it and go to the edit mode, you can actually change the way you want it to read. You can say if the track is unoccupied, which would be a non-yellow state, then it would move on to these next steps. So just for as a quick example, I will show you how that will work. Okay, and another thing to notice here, just because it has a contact trigger, you can still activate these triggers on the screen manually. So let me blank this out, and that's going to be our default state. And let me actually change the signal to red, even though it doesn't apply in real world conditions, or, it really depends on how you want to do it. So what's going to happen is when I click on this K1 icon, and you see over here, the event has this green dot up at the top. That means I'm still in an edit mode, and none of your events are going to actually work. You need to get out of events mode. So you click on that and you make sure this green icon over the edit button is off. And that way now you're actually in a functioning state. So what's going to happen is when I click on K1 here, it's going to go yellow, and it's going to detect that there's nothing on this track and nothing should happen. Okay, so I'll click on it and nothing happens. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch K2 to yellow, and when I click on this, you're going to see W1 goes to red, and the depot signal will now go to red as well. Okay, so that's how an event works. Now, the point is that I'm trying to make here is, let's go back into our event scripts, event it, is that I have a condition of a contact track. And that is this is the state of, when you get your CS3 out of the box. What we've had is users wanted to sort of use these triggers using a turnout as one of these conditions, as well as a signal as being a condition. And you can't do that unless you're in what we call the advanced mode or the extended mode. And if I open up this turnout, for instance, you can see below our position setting here, there's an action and a condition value that is grayed out. That means you can't access those. So this is sort of the topic for today. How do we access that, and how do we use that? So let me get out of edit mode. I'll show you how to do that. We're going to go into your system button at the top left. Oh, by the way, before we get further into this, when you are going to begin to work with event scripting and all this stuff, it's highly recommended, and we can't stress this enough because we constantly get this with users trying to fix problems. When you go into the setup button here, the system button here, right? System button, and you see the save and restore, you want to create a save point. And it's basically you're creating a backup before you do damage. So when I click on the save, it opens up this window. And it's going to save it under this file name at the top here in blue. And that says where it says CS3 backup 001 zip. If you don't change that name, every time you do a save, it's going to save it under that same name and overwrite the previous backup 001 file. So it's highly recommended that when you're going to do stuff like this, you want to save it under a specific name. And ideally, you would date code it so you know when you made that change and when you can restore that. Because once you have a save, if you have issues, and I will cancel this out, you can click restore, and it's going to ask if you actually want to restore this file, basically. And you can select any one of your saved files, and you're basically backtracking and making sure you are at your last operating state that was successful. So remember, before you started playing with this stuff, I recommend you do save your file or your system. And that way, if you do run into errors, you have something to fall back on, and you can eliminate all the issues that you created. Anyways, going back to this, under the system file, you can see we're at the CS3 system. You have these triangles right next to the icon, and you want to close those up. You don't have to close them, but it's kind of easier than scrolling up and down sometimes. And what you're looking for is you're going to actually look for the track panel. And I'm going to expand it by clicking on that triangle. That's the icon up here. And you want to enable the events extended mode. And it's just going to give you, a dialog box to be sure that's what you want to do. Okay, and that's it. That enables your extended mode. And I'll show you what that now involves. So using our track sample here, let's kind of close these out. I don't really need these on. We'll go into the events page. And just to make sure I don't have any kind of issues. Actually, we can do this here. Close this out. Now, instead of using an occupation track like we did in this example, right? And I'm not in edit mode, so you see I can't actually select anything. So I do need to remember to go into edit mode, edit event. And again, the green check mark tells you are in edit mode for events. And you can also see under events, it has an icon and it says what's enabled. Okay, so let's delete the contact track. And now I can actually I can set the change. So I'm looking at the turnout. Again, I'll repeat that procedure. I'm going to click on W1, which is my turnout condition. And rather than being an action, which an action is basically, it's going to switch the turnout one way or another. I'm now actually going to set it as a condition. And you have conditions here for that condition. You can either say it's going to continue on to the next step, or you can create a delay. I'm not going to get into it at this moment, but just kind of, I'll just leave it as it is, because usually that's kind of how I work with it. So how this works now is now the system is going to act when K1 gets triggered. It's going to ask if the turnout W1 is set for curve or set for straight. And if it is set for curve, then it will change the depot signal to red. And I will show how that works now. So let me close this, get out of edit mode. Remember, when you're in edit mode, you cannot test your events. So switch this to straight. Now, when I activate K1, which is my trigger, it's going to now look at W1 to see if it's turned in order to change the depot signal. And again, K1, nothing should happen because my turnout is now straight. Okay, if I change the turnout to curve and click it, it now activates the depot signal. So that's the main thing about extended events, is now you can create track devices to trigger events. And just to show even further, let's switch this around. We will actually change this back. Oops, again, edit mode. And now we edit this. Now we're going to change this back to an action. And this time we'll change this as a condition. So basically, if the line is red, that actually works for me. So we'll do this. And again, my condition, generally want it to come before an action. Now you can still have actions before these conditions, and I'll show that in a second, but let me move this first. And actually, just to show you, we'll take W2 here, and I'll add that before. All right. So what this means is this condition, this question mark icon here, only applies to what follows it. What precedes it is still going to activate it regardless of any condition that you have. So it is important to know where you're placing your conditions and what you're trying to accomplish. So in this instance, I've got 2 to turn. The idea here is that if this depot signal is set for red, we can kind of maybe make a guess that there's a locomotive on that line. And in which case, then we will actually want to switch the train behind it to actually go straight. Okay. So that's how the action is going to flow on this one here. Great. So now let me do this. Close that out. Let's actually make this red, green. Get out of edit mode. Okay, so now this shouldn't really apply because the signal here is green now. My condition is green. So when I click on it, you see how W2 will still go straight because it's before this W1 condition. It's always going to go straight based on the event step. I'll repeat that again. Okay, now the condition is going to be different. If my line, let's say the signal is now red, which is my condition, and I click K1 and activate that, you can see how now both turnouts will go straight. So this gives you a little bit of latitude because now you're not just relying on track occupation sensors. Now you can actually use your turnouts and your signals to reroute trains and control your safety blocks. The other thing that I want to mention, let's see, what was it? It was on the tip of my tongue there. I just had it a second ago. Yep, sorry. It slipped my mind. Let me look at my notes really quick here. Okay, so that's generally most of it. Now the next part, that's for triggering events. Let's see, where are we here? You got your events, signals. You can, in this instance, I know what I was going to talk about. We do have sort of, you want to continue, sorry, it's disjointed right now. The placement that I use these contacts on, just to let you know, on depots, you can sort of create these event scripts where you can start doing some advanced routings. And I'm kind of moving beyond the extended features here, and I just kind of want to show you what you can do as an instance. So let's get rid of this script. And I really want to discuss your trigger types. And again, that's these control types. You have an arrival trigger and a departure trigger. How I've described it so far was basically when these contact tracks go yellow, that's when a train arrives on that piece of track. And you can think about where you have your placements of these contact tracks if you're using them. In this instance, I use the contact tracks as departure triggers to reroute the train on W1. And we're going back to the pre-event extended mode for the events. And this is just so I can show you how you can start to use macros. And macros are coming up now. So in an instance with a 2-line yard, for instance, and I create a contact track, what I'm going to do is, instead of using the arrival trigger, and that is when the train first makes contact tracks, I'm actually going to switch this to a departure trigger. And you can see over here on this lower left icon, this blue icon, that there's sort of a plus sign in front of the track. It's basically the sensors in front of the locomotive. And I'm going to switch the trigger to a departure trigger, and that is your position. So instead of when it goes to yellow, I'm going to make it so when it goes to clear. And you can see now that the lower left icon, that plus is following the locomotive now. And how you interpret that is when the train leaves this contact track, it basically goes off. And that's when that event occurs. And I placed it here right after the turnout because in this instance, and this isn't graphically spaced right, so I can kind of show you how I'm going to modify that if you want it to look right, maybe make it clear for you. So I'm going to pull this turnout here. And the idea is that if I have a train on this, then I want any train behind it to go straight. So now I've set W1 to go straight. Okay, so now I have a train that goes one way. So if I look at it this way, get it at about, actually before that, I'm going to actually set up K2 first so I don't have to go back to this page. So I'm going to do the opposite for K2. I'm actually going to set another departure trigger. And this time I'm going to set the opposite for the turnout to go curve. Okay, and you saw some other icon settings here. Let me just open those up. These are kind of, it's kind of work. I don't know how they apply to turnouts, but it looks to me like if you see a locomotive on that piece of track or you don't. I'm not too sure if that necessarily applies, but we'll just live with it right now. So right now, okay, I have two scripts now, and they do the opposite of each other. And if I click on these manually, you can see that the turnout's going to change directions. Actually, this was not entered correctly. FS2 W1. Okay, there you go. Turn this off. I activate them manually. So the FS2 is this K2 trigger here. And you see how it made the turnout switch. So you can see when I flip back and forth, it changes that turnout to go one way or another. Okay. So again, I'm using departure triggers, and let me actually edit the trackboard page just a little bit to make it a little clearer to understand what's going on here. Okay. So what happens is if you have a train that's going on to the siding here, and once it clears the turnout, so this is basically the train moving on, and it's activating that contact track. It is still on this piece of track. Once it clears this piece of track, I know that it's cleared the turnout, and it can switch the next line out here. And let's say train B comes along and it's going straight to the turnout, and it's hit this contact, and I don't know how long this train is. So as long as this is lit, then I know there's a train on this, and it's possibly blocking that turnout. Once it clears this contact track, then it reroutes the next train to the other line. So what happened is I now have two scripts that I had to deal with. And this is, if you don't understand the extended mode, this is generally how you would need to approach this setup. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually show you the other added feature when you go into extended mode, and that's the macro. And a macro is under the add button here, and you can see how it's all labeled out. And the first macro, and probably the main one that you end up working a lot with, are going to be the macro or controls. And that's the fourth one down here on the left. And you can see there's all kinds of different macros. Macro Shuttle is fairly new. It's got a lot of settings to it. Macro Brake is a braking module macro. I use hardwired boxes for my braking, so exploring with that can give you more flexibility, but let's get into that later. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a macro OR, and it just places this macro in here, and you can see it's a big conditional question mark. I do want this to be triggered by one specific device, so I'm going to pick one of these, K1 or K2, and we'll just go ahead and click K1 and drag it into my control box. Again, I want to use the departure trigger because I'm going to actually mimic those other two scripts that I had. And so we'll change the position so it's a departure trigger. And again, just to remind you, that's that plus that follows the locomotive on this lower left. When I close this box, you can see not only did it add the event that I just created, but it also added, did I do that backwards? No, it added the macro over here, and it's just labeled as OR1. And I'm going to open that up. Whoops, what's that? Oh, did they change the OR macro? Oh, actually, sorry, folks. I actually added the wrong macro. So let me go back and edit this. I guess it's the if macro. K1, add. Is it the if? If, yeah. Sorry, folks. It was the if, not the or. I'll get back into that. I'll explain those differences in a second here. So the if macro, this is the macro I just added, and let me just kind of clarify this. I'm going to edit this one. And just so you know where we are, this is the first macro. If macro. Oops, text has to be up here. First if macro. It's funny, I had to spell it on one and I used the number on the other one. It's because in the back of my mind, I was thinking about how Rick was telling me, you don't spell first with an R. Okay, so this is the first if macro, and you see, go back in here. This is the if container that I added. I added the macro to my step line that's going to be triggered by K1. Now, it adds the if container automatically, and you may have to look for it if you have a bunch of these in there, because it kind of goes, I believe it's alphabetical, and it may put this name somewhere unrelated. What we're going to do here is now I'm going to open up the macro itself, and the macro has 3 containers. They're all pre-made and pre-programmed in here. And how this works is you can only drag one item into each container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these track sensors, and I'll drag K2 because it's being triggered by K1. And I think K1 departure. Okay, so we'll just drag this into this. Okay, and then you kind of have to think this through because, you know, obviously you don't want to be confused, and it's going to happen every time you do this. So essentially what we're saying is if K2 is showing occupancy, what do you want to do? The first thing it does is going to use the then container. So if this track is occupied, then obviously I would want to route the turnout to go away from it so I don't crash a train into it. However, if this is not empty, then you actually have the alternate state, in which case you're going to take W1 and change that so that it goes straight. So this is the confusing part because it's a little easier for me because I used to do some kind of code work. Basically, it's called an if then else statement. If this is true, then it does the first step, the then step. If it is not true, in other words, this K2 would be gray, then it would do the else step. Okay, so just to show kind of how that works, again, this macro is tied into this if container. And just to make sure that I don't have any confusing conflicts, because these two, FS1 and FS2, are going to do essentially what the macro does and the if does. So I want to delete these just to make sure that we don't confuse the system and confuse ourselves. Because when you have duplicates of scripts and you're trying to troubleshoot the problem, it gets hard to find because you may clear up an issue on one script and forget that you had it on another script somewhere else. So that's edit mode. We're out of this. So again, let's look at our 2 conditions. Again, we use the departure tag. So let's switch this out. Now the train again is going on here. Remember, if it is true or false, it all depends on this K2. So if I click on this where K1 goes onto the line and clears, it's going to switch W1 to green. Now we're going to do the opposite. And nothing's going to change after this. It's always going to go to green because K2 is empty. Right? So I can click on this all day and it won't change that turnout. If the train is occupied on that piece of track, if you use an occupancy track, then it switches back and forth. Okay, so it's all going to toggle back and forth. So what I'm doing here is I'm routing a train after it passes to switch this turnout back and forth. Okay, and you can apply the same sort of feature with lights. Okay, go ahead, Ricky.
Got a question, and the question is, do you have to fill in the else statement?
No, you can leave the else off, that's a good question. You don't have to fill in the containers if you don't need them. And the thing is, if you don't really need to use the else either, you can just use the first step where you just use the contact, like when we had the FS step, the simple event, right? Because the macro is just a way to cover two scripts. If you didn't need the else, then you really don't need the macro itself. You could just make your script. You could just make your script this way. Or say, let's actually not use that. Actually, no, I could use that. You could just make it this way. Okay, so you don't need an else because this is going to be an if then type of statement already. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, so now we'll get into what do we do with these other containers. So let's go back into our if container. Okay. Now, these containers can only contain one object. Okay, so you can't put like, well, what if I want my contact track and my signals to be, what if I want my contact track and my turnout to be one way? You can't drag the two in here. And how you need to accomplish that is you need to now add another device. And that would be where the and or the or macro comes in. So let's look at the and conditions. Okay, so we'll add the and let me just label this and macro. It gets a little confusing because you're holding a macro, right? You need to put it in a container, and then the macro itself has its container. Okay, so that's where this gets a little where you're doubling up on certain things, but it's all there. So now what I'm going to do is now you can actually add two states. Okay. Or you can add, you can add as many states as you want. You can be as complex as you want here. Okay, you can say, well, it has to do this, this, and this before it goes into. And then you can now take this. Remember, this container is being held by the and macro holder. And we're going to go back into my if container. Let me expand. Let's see if I can expand this so we can actually show more of the macros. There you go. Lay out a little bit more. Let's open up the if container. And I believe you actually have to add the container into this. So now you can have multiple conditions of triggering. Or let's no, I don't want to delete that. Let me look at the macro again. So I want to look at a different setup here. Kind of experimenting with you on here. I want to see if we can actually drag the and container in. So you can actually drag the and container in itself. You don't have to have the container for the macro holder. And let's see if we can actually delete this macro because I think maybe it was a little step out of sync. So I'm deleting this and the and container is still there. I just don't recall how I was able to add an and container into the if. Now, the thing is, this doesn't just apply to the conditions Because more or less what you're going to want to do is you actually want to say, if your simple condition was true, so let's actually simplify this. I got so many windows open, it gets confusing. So let's actually replace this with the turnout. Now what I can do is I can actually do something like this. Let's go back to my events. Oops, that's my articles. There's your events. And I'm now going to add the and. I'm actually going to take that and macro. And I'm actually going to put it in the then container. So you can do that, but more or less the easiest way to do this, I think, would be it's a roundabout way, because there's multiple ways of doing things, and it can get confusing. So let me actually create a whole new macro, just so you can see what I'm going to do here. Let's say when this trigger gets triggered, I actually want to do three things. I want to actually have this light go to green all the way down here in the corner. I want to have this switch out and have this switch out to green. So I'm going to have all these things switching to green based on one trigger. So we'll say this is, we'll call it multi-step. Go back into my events. All right, and I have my macro if, and I can actually take this multi-step and put it into my then container. So now you can actually have multiple steps happen on one output just based on a simple event step. And this multi-step doesn't actually need a trigger because it's just going to be triggered by whatever triggers the macro. So again, let me open this up. You see, this is the multi-step. It's still in manual mode. And because I'm using this macro to trigger this if container, that's the C1 that's triggering this. Hopefully you're following this, because we're dealing with what we call nested events. You're putting a routing script or an event script into an entire event step into another container. And this is why it gets weird, because an if container can only allow you to put one item into each of these containers. And, you know, more often than not, you may want to have multiple steps. So like if you had a staging yard that required you to switch 4 turnouts, this is one way to do it. And I will show now how that works. So I think everything is in order. Okay, so let's see. This is red. This is red. So again, we use K1 as the trigger, and you should see W1, W2, and the signal 1 to go green on departure. Okay, so that's how you can add multiple steps to an if container. And you can use the and. The and generally works for the condition statements, the first part, because you can use a multi-step for the then and the else container. And hopefully you're following that. This is your condition container. This is your then container, your else container. So the first part is the if container. It's just they don't put the label there because they got the question mark. So the then and the else, you can use a straight script. The and works when you actually have multiple conditions that you want to address. Let's add another one, which you can't add here. Let's add another one. This is kind of kludgy that you have to add a container and then you don't really need it in the end. Now we're going to look at the or. Okay, and that's this one here. Now the or, how that works is you can actually look at 2 different states. So let me add these 2 states. And it doesn't really matter how it works. It's basically what you're saying in an or container is that if either one of these, W1 or W2, matches the picture, then it's going to qualify to go on to the then and the else statement. So the and requires that both of these be true. The or only one of these has to be true. Hopefully you're following me when I say true, but it's essentially all boils down to how you're looking at the if container. So if we look at the simple if container, this will only be true if this turnout is curved before it goes to the then step. If we replace this simple container with an or, right? Whoops, that went into the then container, and that happens. Let me put it in the proper place. Okay. And we'll put the multi-step back in here. The or container is put in here now. So that just means that whatever I set up in the or container, if either one of these is true, then it will proceed to the then step. If I use the and container, I'll put that in here. What that means is that all these three conditions, or if there were two conditions, like if I delete that, both of these conditions have to be true in order for the if container to go to the then step. If you have more than two or three or four, that's fine. They all have to be true on an and container. So hopefully that's clear. It's a lot to go through. And again, this is the extended mode, and it's sort of an advanced featuring of this. Let's go ahead and look at our other events if we can.
You want to answer a question real quick?
Yeah, let's do that. Please interrupt me with you.
Down in the question and answers, John has a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No. You got to read it.
I got to read. Oh, I got to read now?
Yeah, heaven forbid.
You didn't tell me how to read.
Well, I don't tell you how to read. I just tell you that you have to read.
How do you miss the? Okay, so which one am I answering? Or
John in the question and answers. If FS1, if in FS1 event you have the if macro as the third of 5 containers, will the control return to the fourth and fifth container, the one after the if macro?
Okay, so we're dealing with timing. Is that I think is the gist of that question. So let's go. That's the FS1 here, right? But it was obviously, I deleted it, so it's not there. Let's get rid of that for clarity. Let's see. So you're basically, okay, so the question is, and let's maybe I can create it's easier if I create this situation than trying to deal with trying to correct everything here. So you're saying, or what you're asking is, if I have multiple steps, close this out, create a bunch of steps, and then I throw in and then I throw in my conditional. So let me add this again.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry, folks. Forget where I'm at sometimes. Whoops. Sorry. Okay. Is that better? Did it share? No, I didn't select share.
No, I still see you.
You still see this pretty face. Is it still not sharing?
You're good now.
Okay. Okay. So basically, what you're asking is, let me just kind of write up a dummy script here that doesn't make any sense. So essentially, what you're saying is you have pre-steps, which will go through step 1, step 2. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's get out of edit mode.
So John's basically asking, he says, basically, if you embed an if macro within the string of steps, will the steps after the if macro run after the if macro is done running?
That's a good question. Are they going to run after that?
Once the conditions are met, will it return to the script, or is it going to get stuck there?
Okay, so that's a good question. How I'm looking at it now is that these aren't, the way it's written out now isn't actually part of the condition. Okay, so it's actually going to run through all these steps, because technically if I open it up, you see how none of these are set as conditions. They're all set as actions. Okay, this if is only going to handle what's written in the if macro. Does that make sense? It's only going to handle what's in here. Okay. Because the script that I just created, and let's look at it again, these are all action related. So these are always going to happen. And it's not going to interrupt with this or this. It should be that way. And I can't, it's going to probably take me a while to just set that up, just because thinking through all the logic and being a little nervous trying to do this online. But it should just create all these actions. Now, if one of these is a condition, then it's going to stop altogether. In other words, if this depot set was a condition, then it shouldn't proceed on to the next one, because it's not set up in a macro. It's set up where this is the condition here in order to go to the next steps. The if is contained within itself, so it's going to do whatever it needs internally, and then it should still proceed on that. The other thing that I thought you were asking too is a matter of timing. If you have a condition here, these W1, this one here, it may start to activate immediately after this thing is triggered, because it's going to have a separate timing within its own within its own state. So in other words, it's going to run parallel. If you need this to happen after, let's say, anything you've got going on in this if one, then you're going to probably need to add a delay here. And so I think the wisdom here in the end is you really should play around with and experiment with it, because you're going to realize it all kind of interacts differently. And Rick and I do this all the time. It says, we got to test it. You got to test it when you're running it. And, don't get so far ahead of yourself where you're programming like 10 macros or 10 events and you're thinking they're all going to work great. Test it one at a time. Make sure it's doing what you want it to do, obviously. So that's the best advice I can give you there. So hopefully that answered your questions. We had other questions too, right?
In the chat, gentleman saying that he missed the access to macros. Oh, Sean did.
Okay, how to set up so that you have access to the macros. Okay, yeah, I'll go over that really quickly here. Yeah, so that is under system. And so when you look at when you open up the system, you're going to first see it this way. You can scroll down until you see the track access button here, and you're going to open up that panel, and you want to enable the events extended mode button here. Okay. So that is, I think that generally is most of it as far as the macros go. Now, you do have, let's just kind of show out these other macros that we have really quickly if we can get in edit mode. So let's just take a quick peek at some of the other macros here. A lot of people might want to look at the shuttle macro. This kind of operates in the previous shuttle macro that maybe was displayed in the CS2. It's got a lot of steps in it. You can put a container loco. This is whatever locomotive you want to actually operate on the locomotive. And just for you guys who maybe have missed last session here, let me see if I have a locomotive. I actually don't have a locomotive in here. Let's add one in manually here. 3714. I always remember the class 45 number. Oh, or do I? 37145. That should be in the database, shouldn't it? All right, doesn't matter what it is. Let's just select one locomotive. Okay. Edit. Okay. So we can just drag our locomotive into this container here. And obviously put some speed steps in there for you. And if you ever want to, once you have this programmed and you ever have another locomotive, if you click on this locomotive under this, when you have more than one locomotive, this pull down menu will actually display a list of all your locomotives, in your system, and you just need to switch out the locomotive. You don't have to create a whole new macro for that, or just to do this. It's based on S88 contact, so you have your start and ending tracks. That is a contact at each end of the shuttle, and then you have a middle container, in which case you can create a pause or stop. Haven't played with it too much because I actually kind of been using more advanced programming for shuttles. Okay, let's get rid of this. I want to clean it up so it's easy to watch. All right. Getting too many of these events gets a little overwhelming. All right, let's open up this one again. And let's look at the loop macro and the random macro. The loop macro, let's add two of these. Let's add the manual. Let's add the manual break. So we'll just add all these macros at once. That way I don't have to keep opening the containers. So let's look at the loop container first. So the loop container basically is going to cycle over and over again whatever it is you want to have happen. So let's do this, and I'll add this. Oh, won't let me add it again. So let's see if I can add it twice. There you go. I'll do this. Do this. Okay, so you can see basically I'm having it cycle back and forth. Now, the issue here is that it's going to happen right away because there's no timing delay. And what you want to do is you want to be sure you have a delay in here. And 2 seconds is actually pretty good for testing. So we'll do a 2-second delay. I want to add this over here because remember the way a loop is going to work. I shouldn't say remember, is it's always going to go back and forth. It's going to go from W2 back to W1, from the green to red, green to red. And let's close this, and it should be. I put these all in FS1. Let me get rid of this because I don't want to trigger these other macros that may cause issues. So let's close that. Let's test it, shall we? Okay. Operation mode. Close this window. And I'm in a manual mode for the events, so I lost my button. Get over here. Now, hopefully, if I click on this macro, did it work? It should cycle back and forth every 2 seconds. You see how it's changing those turnouts back and forth? Now, the problem with the macro loop is you can't shut them off. Or at least I haven't found a way to shut them off yet. Unless you hit the stop bar on your layout and you kill track power. And then you re-enable power. And then it should, yeah, you see how it's still cycling. So I kind of found it difficult that once you set up a loop, there's no actual trigger to end the loop. At least I haven't found it, unless there is some control that I haven't explored yet. So let me get into my edit mode. Gotta kill it. Come on. Close this. There you go. Exit mode. Come on. I can't get in edit mode. There you go. Let's try that. Edit event. And under your controls, there might be something here under the control contact or the trigger contacts. So you have a CS3 halt, CS3 go, events go. That might actually stop it. It's not something I've played with. I'll get back to some questions. Do you want to run a continuous hub? Okay, well, I just explained how it works. You just need to program the loop and timing. What was that question afterwards that you just deleted, Rick?
I didn't want you to see it. That's why. It was if there's some kind of debugger that will tell you of any conflicts in the central station.
Yeah, that's a no. You're gonna
Yeah,
run
no,
into
that's
when you
what I
just start
said.
seeing buggy things happen.
Yeah, like a turnout switching back and forth really
Yeah,
fast because it's got a conflict.
it happens a lot. Believe me, believe it, or when you, especially if you start nesting your events, um, keep a clear track. I did have at one point a method to sort of track what each event did, but once you started nesting things, then the note taking I took got a little confusing. I haven't attempted it again. How do you start multiple trains at the same time?
Well, you turn the stop bar off.
Um, is this something you're trying to do in an event script? Probably, yeah. That's not.
In an event script, I mean, you can get them to go roughly the same time because the actions are so fast, the processes are so fast in the Central Station 3. You can have one go and the next step have the other one go. That's how I did the Golden Spike routing for our show layout.
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, so basically, essentially, what's happening is if I really had a system that had more than one locomotive, so let's add another one here. Let's add multiple locomotives, just so I don't have to keep going back. Just pick some at random. Make sure all their based. Starts at 216. Come on. Okay. All right. So here I have 3 locomotives. You just add them into the line. Oops. Oh, okay. So probably what it is you can see here that each event will only hold one container, right? Or one locomotive. So which one did I just add? Is that
The
one?
216.
All right. Yeah. So here, giving it some speed. Okay. And add one more. And then what you can do is, let's see if we can actually do this. So I haven't actually played with this. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to nest all these 3. I'm going to put all 3 of these, into one script. And that eventually should start all your locomotives. And to prove a point, let's go ahead and activate it manually. And you should see the speed bars for each of these 3 locomotives go up, right? Would help if you actually applied power to the track. And there you go. You start all 3 at once. I recommend doing this on a manual control if you're going to do that, because if you automate this, really, how are you going to know where those locomotives are on the layout? Maybe you're going to be starting in places where you really don't want to give them speed. So at least this way you have manual control.
Couldn't you keep them all separate also and have the same contact activated rather than nesting all 3?
Yeah, you could probably do that, but yeah, if you're going to use a contract, so like Rick's kind of proven a point there. You can do things with. There's different ways to skin a cat. So as Rick was saying here, let's close this. He wants to activate that using K1, and let's do this. Let's try it out, right? While we're experimenting, play K1 as well. Now let's just do 2 locomotives, just so we don't go bonkers reprogramming everything. Okay, let's drop the speed down here. Okay, so remember I only programmed 2 locomotives, right? So now when K1 gets activated, and you have 2 speeds going. So yeah, you can use a contact tracker or trigger, whatever you want. Whatever you want to trigger the event will work fine. The control macro. John, I'm not really sure what we're referring to here. The control macro. Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, you're controlling those word triggers. Yeah, that's a gray area for me. don't really know what's going on. So basically, that's it as far as the extended event features go. I believe I've covered everything. We can take a few questions. I knew I do have a part 2 to the presentation. That's setting up a basic staging yard. We actually kind of determined that we have an advanced method and sort of a starting method. Let me look at. I want to look at my events really quick to make sure I covered most of the macros. Random macro is sort of like any of those. It's just going to create whatever you put in the stream. I think it's going to activate certain things randomly. I think didn't we play around with that, Rick, once?
Not really. I think we talked about it when the feature first came out. We talked about it, that it's like a roll of the dice. If you got like 6 lines for a train to go to, it'll pick one of them. You know.
Yeah. I think that's what it was. It would just kind of set things up randomly and
That would work good for a hump yard. That would,
yeah.
you know.
Let's take a quick look at the break macro so you guys just can see it. There's a lot of containers in here. It actually has to do with locomotive speeds, pause times. You're switching semaphore signals for that. Again, to some degree, it's one of those things that we can really spend a lot of time working with it, or you can just add a brake module to your layout. I found the latter easier to deal with.
Yeah.
But we can play with this at one point.
Brake,
but it does require the same amount of sensors that you would, or at least track separators that you would a regular brake module. So usually once you get the wiring done, you're kind of done with it to some degree. But
we got a guy raising his hand if we want to allow him to talk here.
Yes, he
if
can.
RH Phil is ready to talk. Oh, Charlie just... Okay, talking permitted for RH Phil. If you want to ask a question, you have to unmute your mic.
Okay, while we're waiting for them, I can answer David Gregory. Any pre-programmed events online that you could copy that might be useful?
Clicked on that by mistake.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. Hi, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. So what, do you not have a question, or do you? I'm not sure.
No, he put his hand up by mistake.
Okay, all right. So are there any pre-programmed events online that you could copy that might be useful if you're creating a new layout? Not that I'm aware of. That could be problematic because events themselves are going to be catered to what you have on your layout and what you've labeled them, and it's all basically the decoder addresses and all that stuff. It's just going to be specific to your layout.
Every layout, so
even if there were pre-programming macros, you'd have to edit them probably extensively. So, okay. Can you add a virtual switch to check its condition later in an event script? A virtual switch.
Like a phantom switch.
Right, give me a second to read that. Train passes a recontacting, therefore I know. You can actually, you can do that. You can actually use. I've done it before where I've actually used the contact and switched it as an event step, if that's what you're kind of referring to, and then using that contact to basically enable other scripts itself. So, yes, I won't fully explain it. It gets a little confusing, and that's probably going to be more on the advanced steps. So, but Georgia, I think you understand what's going. But yes, you can do that. I've actually done it in sort of a hardware method where I've actually used an event step to actually kill a signal to an S88, thus preventing the S88 from being read. But that was before the macros came out. So that's what you can do. Okay, so let's, I'm thinking, what, do you want to take some questions before I kind of go into how to do the staging yard?
Yeah, it might wake people up.
Yeah. Thanks. I'll let you answer the questions then. I'm going to reload. Am I still sharing my screen? No, I shouldn't.
No, you're good.
Okay, so I'm going to load the new layout in, and we can get back to that whenever we're ready. So, all right, restore. Doesn't look like a. I don't think we've had any questions on YouTube. Oh,
yeah.
you've answered though. Okay, great.
A couple of them, one or two.
Okay. Nothing. Okay. All right. Well, why don't I kind of get into it? Change that out. Share my screen. Okay. I'm back to sharing. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got the first layout for, a 4-line staging yard, hidden yard, wherever you want. And the layout here, and this is the simplified method because there is an advanced method which I won't be covering here. But this is what I call a cyclical staging routine. And how it works is the way it's set up is my train is going to first come into track 1, and it generally would stop right away. It's going to stop here. And as it enters, it's going to release the train on line 2. Okay. And so that's half of the program. So each one is going to rotate through. When a train returns to line 2, it's going to release the train on line 3. And when the train enters line 3, it's going to release the train on line 4. And when the train comes back to line 4, it's going to release the train on line 1 here at the bottom, S1. The other thing that you have to consider too is that when you vacate a train, or when a train vacates a line here, so let's go to the S2 example, the train is basically exiting this piece of track, or this second line here. And I do want to make sure that I reroute the train so that the following train behind K1, because remember what releases the train on line 2 is this K1 contact here. So when the train enters this, it releases the signal on S2. And the position that I place this contact is right after the turnout. So as soon as my train is fully on K1, then I'm going to make sure that this train that's going around the loop from K2 or whatever's behind it is going to go onto the empty line. Okay, so that means that I need to set W1 to 2, and then I need to make sure that W2 goes onto the second line. So hopefully you can kind of follow the logic. So I'm dealing with two things. I'm dealing with releasing a train on the next train to go through my staging yard. And I'm dealing with making sure that I reroute the train following the triggering train that goes onto the empty line that was previously vacated. So hopefully that was clear. It's kind of a weird statement, especially when you don't know or you don't see pictures of trains on the layout. Just to kind of quickly go through this. So what I've done here is I've already programmed my events for K2 and K3, and I will just go because they're actually going to be a repeat of what's going on with K1, and I will now show you that event step now. So actually FS4, what was this? This was actually should have been relabeled. Okay, so the first step we're going to do here is we're going to do my arrival step for contact 1. Okay, so that means that K1 is going to be my trigger. I'm going to put that into the module, and it's going to be an arrival trigger. You can do it as a delay trigger. This is where it's all up to you. You just kind of want to play with it and see how you want it to work. I do want to relabel it so I know that when I do need to make changes or go back to it, excuse me, I can find it. And this is my K1 trigger. And I'm using this as an arrival trigger. So I'm going to label it. I'm going to give my shorthand of an A for arrival. So I know it's an arrival event. So basically when my train reaches K1 here, I want to now vacate the train on line 2, where the S2 is. So I'm going to set the signal to green. Okay. And you can kind of see that. We'll get out of edit mode really quickly, and you can see how that works. Let's turn that off. So this is going to be my initial setup here. And don't worry about the routing right now. We're going to get to that in a second here. So the train is going to enter line 1. It's going to hit contact K1, and you can see that signal on S2 here on the right, or close to the middle, is actually going to go green. Okay, and you can see how it did that. It went to green, and whatever train's waiting here is just going to take off out of this line. All right, so that's my first step. The next step here is now we're going to use K1 again, but this time we're going to make it a departure trigger, meaning that it's going to clear that contact track. Now, in this example, again, I'm using short contact tracks, and they follow immediately after the turnout. And let's see, I didn't label that. So let's make sure I label this. This is going to be K1 for departure. And this time, when K1 departs, that means that the train is on the right side of this contact and it's cleared my turnout. Now I can initialize my rerouting. I want to be sure that it now changes W1 to go left or curve off. And I want to be sure that W2 reroutes the next train onto line 2. And that's basically it. And while I'm in here, I'm going to, this should actually be labeled K3 departure. Okay, and you can see the first steps here. Let me get to a prime state here where that's off. Okay. All right, so this is our, sort of like our first state here. My train is coming onto K1, and you see it releases S2. And once my train is completely onto this line, not blocking W1, it reroutes the next train to go onto that empty line. Because remember, this light is green and my train is leaving that track. Okay, and I've already programmed 2 and 3, so you can see that now when I click on this, it's going to have sort of the same effect. It's going to release S3 when this goes yellow. K2 goes yellow. S3 goes green. And when K2 goes, I might not have programmed this right, it reroutes to W3.
The only thing you forgot was to change the signal to red.
Yes, I'm going to get to that. So that's a good question that you mentioned. So I'm going to get to that. So sort of half jumping the gun, but you're making a good point. So that's 3, 4, and now I'm rounding on to 4. So now I'm actually going to program my events for K4 because, again, this is cyclical. It's going to go around in circles. So what I want to do at this point is I need to go back into my event scripts, and I'm going to double check some of my departure gates because, okay, W3 is good. I need to make sure that's right. Okay, so that's right. So now we're going to do the event for contact 4. And oh geez, sorry, jumped on me. I want to close that. K4, it's my contact. And this is going to be my arrival trigger. K4 arrival. And because I'm on the 4th line, when the train enters that, I actually want to release this train here on the line to go. So that's the first start of the cycle. Okay, and that's the arrival trigger. That's that. Now we're going to set up Kforce departure trigger. So I'm maneuvering these screens. It's one of those funny things that you appreciate big icons, but then when you're really working on this stuff, they get in the way. So let's make sure that's a departure. Okay, yes. Let's make sure my labeling is right so we're clear on what's happening. For departure. And this time, remember the departure is the rerouting. And what I really need to do is I just need to set W1 to go straight to make sure that we're returning onto that empty line. Okay, so again, I still have in the back of the mind what Rick was saying. It's like I haven't stopped locomotives. Okay, so as we cycle through this too, so I can go all day here, and we won't see the turnout signals, but you see my routing is all going to activate properly. Okay. Okay, and so you can see I can just cycle through this all day. Now, the issue with the stopping of the train, you want a train to stop all the time. And you could program them into these event steps here, as we did, if that's one way to do it. And I think that was actually the first way I did it when I first started getting into these event scripting. But there's an easier way and it's a faster way, and it's also a more of an assured way. Because the thing is, if I add a departure tag, or even if I added a departure tag, a stop event, basically doing something like this, then I have to put a stop position on each line, and I have to be sure that it stops that train. But a more effective way for me, at least in all the running that I do, and it's pretty much the way I do it now, is I actually have added another event here. And let's go here. And I'm actually going to use K5 now. And you can use either an arrival trigger or a departure trigger. It doesn't really matter, because at that point, the train's already over here and I'm not rerouting anything. And that's my engine generally. But if you have like a pushing train, for instance, and you want to worry about the second slider, use a departure trigger, which I will do here. Close this out. And then now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to take all my signals. You probably see where I'm going at with this. I'm going to add all signals here. And I'm going to make sure that they're all set for stop. Because once it's set to stop, it doesn't matter that you're restopping a light that's already stopped, right? It's not going to hurt the system. It's just sending a command that'll be ignored. So if you have trouble tracking this, what's happening is, remember, every train that leaves here is basically traveling down the line, and it's going to stop all. Oops. Sorry, I'm in edit mode again, so forgot it. It's going to stop all my signals, regardless of what happens. So if you process the cycle correctly, we have a train coming into line 1. It releases S2, right? So now I actually have 2 trains moving at the same time. I've got one train going down this, and I've got one train going onto the siding. Once this clears, it's going to reroute the train. It's already going to stop because S1 is set to stop. Meanwhile, this train that's moving along the frogs here is going to hit K5, and once it clears the yard entirely, it's going to reset its stopping block, because this line will still be empty by the time it clears. So that's it. That's how you can do a simple staging yard. You basically have your arrival triggers, which are going to release a train, like so. Your departure triggers will help with the rerouting. And then you have this sort of post trigger that makes sure all your signals go back to red. And that is, that's just using triggers. That doesn't require occupation sensors. Now you can do the same thing with occupation sensors. So for instance, let's edit the trackboard page. We're done with the events. Edit trackboard page. Now, the thing is, if you, let's say you use the occupation sensors up here, right? You could still trigger that, but then your trains will never clear this to turn off. So you can actually, if you wanted to, you can use, let's say if we actually did this, and let's go back into the event script here. For this is for K1. I'm never going to have a departure trigger because look where the train would need to clear if it was on the other end of that staging line. Well, you can add the rerouting to this portion of the layout, but then you'd want to be sure you have timing correctly. So you can do the rerouting this way if you wanted to. And maybe after you change the signal, you can add, like a 5-second delay or whatever, just to make sure that the train is completely on it. This is the kind of programming you need to do if you're not using contact tracks, or if you're using circuit tracks. You're going to have to do everything onto one event rather than separating departure and arrival triggers, which is how I like to do it, and it works clean and it's elegant that way because I have more flexibility. So that's it. Hopefully you got all that. I think we are now open up for questions. So thanks for listening in on that. Any questions? Stop sharing. That's a good question. How's that one? All right, Rick, you can unmute yourself if you wanted.
Been answering questions.
Yes, thanks. Could you step through how the trains come and go on that last demo? Okay. All right. I think I'm still under the, let me put this again. Let's put this where it belongs. So essentially, okay, so let's get to sort of a primed layout. Think of it this way. I have a train on 2, I have a train on 3, and a train on 4. My empty line is K1 because you always needed an empty line, right? Otherwise, the train's got nowhere to go. If the train coming in hits K1, it releases the stop on the waiting train on K2. So now you have a train that's now exiting the station to the right. I have a train that's entering the station from the left on K1. When the train clears K1, in other words, it clears the turnout, W1, it allows for the next train behind it to enter into line 2, which is, again, being vacated because of the green signal. The train is taking off because you have set speeds on your locomotive. Let's sit there, and then the train is still clearing, and once it clears K5 or makes contact with K5, it resets the signal to stop, making sure that the train going onto the second line stops at the second signal. When that train comes in, the cycle kind of repeats itself. It releases the train following it onto S3. This train is now leaving the yard. When the train completely enters the second line, it reroutes the following train to go onto the now empty line or the emptying line.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Should have told me that earlier.
I was answering questions, man.
I
got a babysit.
You got to pay attention.
I was.
No, you weren't.
More than you.
Apparently. I'm looking at the screen. I'm not looking at questions. So. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Dave. Sorry, Greg. All right. So again, let's repeat everything again. So here we go. This is your stat. Okay. So let's go here again. Now, again, I have a train waiting on lines 2, 3, and 4. When a train is entering, it's going to enter into the empty line here. And it's guaranteed to stop because my signal is already set for red, S1. Train hits this contact. It releases the train that's waiting on S2 to go forward. So now you have 2 trains moving. You got a train leaving the station, and you have a train entering the station on line 1. When the train on line 1 clears this turnout, it now can reroute a following train to go on to the second line. The train that is exiting line 2 is going to hit contact 5, making sure that all signals are back to red and that the train that does enter into line 2 is going to stop. The process repeats. We now have a train going on to line 2. When it hits that first contact on K2, it's going to release the line on train 3. Let me read these questions since Rick seems to think I need to answer these. Do you need 2 reed switches or do I need 2 like 24995? Contact tracks involved in the 24995 work great for this example. If you're going to use reed switches, you do need one, but you have to modify it where you're not going to use a departure tag. You have to put everything onto the one event based on the reed switch. The reed switches can be difficult, especially when you have locomotives with 2 sliders on it. We're talking about magnetic. I guess if you're talking about magnetic reed switches, you just got to place them forward enough farther on. Anyways, back to sort of like this routine. So again, the train is on to line 2. Once it clears the turnout W2, it reroutes the train to go on to 3 because W3 and the train on S3 is departing and hopefully hitting contact K5 at this point, which again resets the signals to stop any incoming train. K3 does the same thing where it's actually going to activate a train for line 4, cycles through. Now here's where it gets to cycle back, is that once the train is entering K4, it needs to release the train on line 1. Therefore, you're always going 1, 2, 3, 4 for entry and exit for your locomotives. It's just staggered in a mental way, right? So now you can see I triggered K4, it releases S1. The train coming on to line 4 is going to stop because my signal is set for stop by K5. And once the train is completely onto that, therefore it cleared the turnout W3, I can reroute the empty train to go onto the empty line 1. So hopefully that made sense. So, all right, order it. Not too sure what I meant by order.
I got that one. Don't worry about it.
Okay. So hopefully you got that clarified the routine. But it's basically any train that enters is going to release the next train. Once that train clears, it makes sure all your signals are set for stop, thus preventing any trains from running through the staging yard automatically. And then once the train clears these turnouts, it reroutes the train to bypass and go to whatever line it needs to. So right now, as long as I click this on and off, these are sort of
you're
like
not sharing your screen.
Shoot, yeah, sorry, I did it again. Just rambling on, folks. Let's see.
I'm so used to hearing you ramble, I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, it's that drony voice putting you to sleep, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Not sharing screen. Let's share it again then. I keep turning it off. I should just leave it on and you don't have to look at me.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah. So, so just quickly to summarize some of these things. K5's purpose alone is just to make sure that all tracks are set for stop and nothing can overrun past the staging yard. That's all it does. So the contacts 1, 2, 3, and 4 is just a cycle routine to release trains and reroute trains. Okay, so I'm just going to click 2, 3, 4 in sequence. And you can see, I mean, obviously once I have them all to green, you're not going to see that. So then you can just focus on how it's rerouting.
Got a kind of an interesting question here from Stephen Sornsby. He says, a great explanation for programming a staging yard. One question, would it be the same to place K5 ahead of W1 to set all signals to red? I could see where that might work. You might have, depending on your timing of between K5 and K1 before in between W1 with W1 in between it, I could see where it would work.
Well, okay, so yeah, it would work.
Yeah.
There's
I
no
like that
real
they all.
issue with it.
I like
Yeah.
the safety of them all turning red and staying red as soon as the train leaves.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because then I'm guaranteed it's where it is. Now, the other thing is there's another part of the scripting when you do an advanced staging yard, like I won't cover here because that's really kind of in there, where we're actually starting to involve macros. Um, that's when I actually have a contact before the staging yard, but I still end up having this trailing one to be sure that you don't just making sure they're all stopped. And the again, what I had said was at first when I did these events yard by yard, I had to put a stop event at each one of these lines, and it just actually was optimal and easier to control when I put a single trigger to set all these things through red. It guaranteed that my train something was going to stop. Let's see. Does the length of the train make any factors as to releasing the trains to follow if train 1 does not clear K5 when train ending W will not be completely entered? So this is where sort of, I think the question you're asking, it's really kind of flexibility and where you want to do that. So for instance, if you have a train making contact with K1, for instance, and I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I have no idea anymore. You can put a timing delay when it releases the train on K2. You can actually wait for the train to completely be on. So in other words, you can set it for a departure tag before you release S2. It's really up to you on how you want to do that. Experimentation is key, what you want to do. Again, I'm using sort of occupation tracks. It does, when you use contact tracks, then it gives you the flexibility of using as long a train as you want, as long as it's encompassed by your staging line. There are different methods. I've used contact tracks at the end of the line, but then that was when I had a pre-routing situation. So what you may have sensed here is that when I use departure tag, it's rerouting a train after it's cleared. There is definitely methods to routing trains ahead of the signal. And why don't I go back to, let's go back to our first example and I can kind of show you guys how that works. So I'm going to load, I'm going to restore. And this is another reason why it's good to have save and restore points, because I can load in examples for you guys. Whatever that says. Okay, so let's look at just a simple depot station, a line here. This is set up pretty much like that staging yard, right? I had triggers here after the turnout. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move one of these triggers. And let's move K1. I'll put it over here. And let's see. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily need to use a macro, but let's see what we do here. Let's see. Dang it. Don't jump around on me. Just trying to pull you into a usable view. All right, let's lower this. Let's create a new event. All right, I'm going to drag K1 here. That's going to be my trigger. This is going to be a pre-trigger. So this is before the train actually reaches the yard. I think I am no longer in advanced mode. So let's look at it. Okay, I'm not. So let's get into my system. And I'm going to go into the extended modes. Click this event extended mode. That puts me in advanced features. And I'm going to actually set up my depot signal to be a condition now. And I want it to be red. Okay, so what I'm doing here is this. My train is reaching K1. And if it sees that this depot signal is red, let's kind of assume that there is a train waiting there. Then I'm going to actually reroute my track to go straight. So this is where you're actually using a signal to look ahead to do routing, whereas the staging yard is sort of looked behind it. Remember, because we're using it when it cleared the turnout to reroute the train. This is sort of the opposite. It's looking ahead to see where it should be routed to. And this is one instance, and we can look at it this way, and I can show you how that works. Add edit mode, close that. Now, if the signal is green, stop mode. If the signal is green, nothing's going to happen because it's okay for the train to reroute onto the siding, right? So you can see nothing happened to W1. If my signal is red, obviously I don't want another train to go onto the siding, so it's going to divert the train to go straight. The other example of how we're going to approach this is that if you don't want to use the signal, and sometimes it's safer to do it this way rather than relying on the signal to give you the indicator. We just kind of take my contact track K2 and close that. But okay, so you guys might be confused right now because I need to redo the track plan. Now we're going to actually put contact 2 over here. All right. So how this looks then is if there's no train, regardless of what the signal is here, as long as if K2 is black or gray, then the train is okay to go onto that line. But once we actually have true occupation, and in other words, there's a train waiting on contact 2, and I hit contact K1, then logically it needs to divert the train and go straight. So hopefully you see the difference because it was 2 different track plans. This contact 1 is actually looking ahead to see what the conditions are in front of it. And when I had K2 over here, and K2 was when it was actually placed close to the turnout, I was using that to signify what's the condition of the turnout and rerouting it after it had cleared the turnout. So that's something that you kind of it's not that you need to be aware of it, but you do have those uses. You can have something that looks ahead, and then you can also have a contact tracker that'll look behind it to decide how to operate the tracks and trains. So, all right. Or is any other questions? How you want, if it's a good setup for setting up as macros, yes, definitely. And again, that is sort of can be an advanced thing too. So let's kind of look at that. Because I actually have set this up as a macro. Sorry, edit mode. Whoops, wrong one. Edit mode, edit event. So you're actually kind of looking at it, this situation here. You can take contact 1, and we're going to actually add a macro if, right? In which case it creates this macro if container. And it'll basically be like this. And that's actually good that you mentioned this, because now if this contact is occupied, then W1 is going to go straight. And if it's empty, then you actually want to curve onto the turnout. Okay, so you see now how it works is that when K1 gets triggered, it's going to look at K2. If it's occupied, then it will go make sure W1 is straight. And if it is unoccupied, then it'll go ahead and go curve to the right. So yes, that's basically the gist of it. And while I'm not going to explain it here, this is definitely how you can definitely use this macro to control a multi-line staging yard, except you're going to probably need to do a little more nesting, which I don't really want to get involved with here, but let's look at this. So right now K2 is empty, and if I click on this, it reroutes the train automatically. And if I click on K2, it will straighten it out. So yes, I'm glad you kind of sussed that out. That's exactly how I use it. The macros do kind of come in handy. But again, there's a lot of information there. Macros, nesting containers, using the and macro, using the or macro, just a lot of layers that you kind of have to work through. And, try them one at a time. Do the simple ones. Personally, I avoid the breaking macro. The loop macro is kind of iffy, again, because I can turn it on, but I haven't been able to turn it off. Might be fun to use once in a while, especially if you have like a routine for, maybe you want a train whistle to go on every 10 minutes. Then you can kind of do that because you can actually apply them to locomotives. And again, the rule of thumb is we are controlling track events. Controlling locomotive events around the layout can be kind of problematic because you just don't know. The system doesn't know where it is. So for instance, if I program K2 to operate locomotive 1, then it's only going to be able to operate locomotive 1. Whereas even if it gets triggered by locomotive 2. So if you wanted a whistle to blow in the station and you program it for locomotive 1 could be over here on the right side of the locomotive on the track when K2 makes that track trigger. So you're going to have random stuff go on. So I prefer not to program locomotives, program track events. It's a little cleaner. Was there a question here on okay, I have a question here on length of track from YouTube. Should be longer, longest card to evolve faulty detection. Yes. So what you're asking is when you're dealing with contact tracks, your contact tracks ideally, and I got to unshare my screen so you can actually see. The first time I have to unshare the screen for you guys to see. If you have a locomotive and your contact track is only this long, well, you can see what happens is I've got a wheel on each side. It's straddling that contact track. So what's going to happen is that contact track is going to be on here. It's going to turn off and it's going to turn on again here. And that's what we call a double trigger. And you'll run into double triggers occasionally and there's creative ways to get around it. But ideally when you have a piece of track or a car that's got a wide wheelbase, make sure your contact tracks clear both and don't straddle it like this. You want to make sure you have a good length of contact to avoid miscommunication. And these bogies are 2-axle bogies, right? If you have single axle bogies, then think about an uneven table. If you get tension pulling that track apart, it might lift one of those wheels and extend the that contact area. So just things to think about you might run into. Joe wants to know, is there any way to download these webinar videos for further review and playback? Yes, Joe, we actually post these non-live on YouTube. So when we're done, we've just started to send those links out because they are different from the live feed links. But all these webinars are available on YouTube, so you can preview those later. All right. Any other questions, folks? Ask Rick a question. I'm sure you'd like to hear his voice.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been typing, not answering live.
Do your lips move
your
when
droning
you type?
is just, soothing.
Do your lips move when you type?
No, I just move my tongue. Anybody want to answer live or talk live? You raise your hand and we can let you speak. And if you want to talk to us. If not, we can just yeah, the anonymous attendees. I've asked him a bunch of questions today. Yes, you have. We don't know who you are, but
you're anonymous.
You're an anonymous attendee.
If you don't have program looks, is there a way to have one play station announcement when it arrives? That's actually a good question. I was speaking to a user the other day, Richard Weeks. Rick, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to him. He was asking about that, and he came up with an interesting solution. He says, "Can I program an extra decoder to do that?" To do station
announcements,
space stations on. I said, yeah, you can, because as long as it's stationary in one area, then you can always use that. You can always trigger for that decoder to work rather than a moving locomotive. But then again, so then there was also the other solution was that your CS3 does have a speaker output, and you can load sounds into it. And so rather than using a decoder, you can program station sounds into it and plug into that speaker. I haven't tried it yet.
So. No, we haven't tried it, but that's part of what the reason I think the CF card is for, or a slot in the back of the CS3 to hold those larger files, so you're not using the memory of the central station. And you can do it off a USB, I believe, also, but that's kind of clumsy and bulky, sticking out of the back of the central station. So there's the CF port, and I don't have a central station that's not plugged in right now. So
a CF port.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can pull mine up here.
But like Curtis said, we haven't explored that. And all you
really
need to do is,
port is.
Pardon me?
Is that the speaker port you're talking about?
No. You have a speaker port, but you need to save the.
Oh, are you talking about this port here?
Yes.
Yeah, I've never really explored that. So there is a card port here, and you're saying that's what we use for sounds.
It's just memory, and you load the memory. You load the sound onto there, I believe, and plug it in there, and then you just insert that into a route. I believe.
Yeah.
But I think you also need an amplified speaker to plug into that port, which means it's one of your small standalone speakers.
Yeah, it might be need to be a powered speaker, because I think it uses like a headphone output jack.
There's an audio in, and that's what you need, is something with an audio in that is powered, that will amplify the sound.
Okay, so there was a question related to that. So what is the sound file in the macro menu used for? Okay, I believe those are actually the sound files that you can access. Those are sound file wave files that are loaded into the CS3, and you could probably trigger those using an event script as well. You just need to plug into that speaker port.
Geez, we just opened Pandora's box. Look at all these questions about it.
Okay, let me there. So I do want to answer one question. Are you planning to go deeper into the macros and programming? Right now in this format here, the webinar, that is, I don't think we're going to do that right now, because that's sort of, a quote master class kind of thing. It really gets heavy at a point in you guys have listened to me drone on for 2 hours, and I'm surprised you're still awake. So we'll probably, if we do have something like that, we may have notice of it. We might actually go through the Marklin Dudes channel rather than an official webinar. This is really sort of getting you familiar with the CS3 and how to operate it. But definitely the programming, in-depth programming, I'd like to go into that, because there are some really kind of things that I do that are really kind of hard to explain. And it's a slow process. Let's see. So that was answered. Nope, cancel that. That's okay. Sound file in the macro menu. So yeah, I think I've answered that one. What's the media port for? Is that the USB port that you're referring to?
I don't know. It's either the USB or that port we just pointed out.
Yeah.
For a card.
As far as placement of the speaker goes, that's kind of up to you. You can put it anywhere you want. You could probably plug in some headphones. Never tried it.
So you don't wake the baby.
Yeah. The sound files look like it looks like the sound files that they're using in the CS3 are all WAV files, WAV suffix. Guess you can always play with other ones. How do you get to the Marklin channel? Well, this Marklin channel here. This is the sort of quote official Marklin channel for us. If we do anything subsequent to this or outside of this, it's sort of I don't know where we're posting that yet. It's not really an official thing that we do, so we don't expound on that too often. I think we posted the last one through the Marklin
dudes.
the users group, the Marklin.net. Was it Marklin?
Well, we didn't actually. Well, there was a post for it, but we don't record it and post the video because we don't have the capability.
Yeah, we weren't able to actually post that. So it's sort of a what did I call it? A fireside chat kind of thing.
Yeah.
So very informal. Yeah, so the sound files probably need to be converted to WAV files, unless I don't know if it will take MP3s. It's really kind of hard to know that.
We might be able to.
Linux based.
It might be. Excuse me. It might be in the book. We have to look in the book. Running digital trains with Marklin CS3. I think
as far as reviewing the webinars, and this is where it gets weird, is because the YouTube channel itself is Marklin Trains, but clearly when you go into YouTube and you do a search on Marklin Trains, you're going to get a lot of entries. So it's not really specific to the channel. If you are a digital club, and again, we reiterate, you should be part of the digital club, we will send a link out to all the digital club members. So you should get that link so you can view stuff post. And once you view one, they'll all, you can view all the other 7 that we have.
6. The first one we don't.
No, this is 8. So that was 7. I already subtracted the 1. Why not use 2 circuit tracks in the staging yard? Well, you can. It really is kind of up to you to set the logic. But the staging yard that I did, the demo that I showed you, works fine the way I had it. It really you can apply any amount of circuit tracks you need to, whatever is going to work for you. So I know there's a cooking channel on YouTube that I watch occasionally, and he always repeats, however you want to salt your chicken is up to you. More or less. You cook this layout your own way.
Hey, you got to remember that contact tracks are only momentary also.
Yeah, and just in case you're not sure, circuit tracks are the little flipper types that just read the slider. Reads are the magnetic reads where you need to attach magnets, and contact tracks are reading your wheels. And contact tracks, I love them because it gives me the flexibility to sort of control any length train that I want. I don't have to worry about train length with circuit tracks, especially in blocking yards where you're waiting for a train to clear a signal. You got to limit your train according to a standard length at that point. Contact tracks, I avoid that altogether. Where can I find Marklin dudes? We're the same guys. You can just reach us through digital, but as far as the videos go, we kind of have to keep that unofficial to some degree. We haven't sorted that out. We did it through marklinusers.net last time, or we saw the posting for marklinusers.net. So you can keep an eye that way. Send us a text, email if you really want to reach out to us. And you can send it to digital@marklin.com, and we'll let you know that way. I think we've only done one. But getting into the really advanced event scripting is sort of my wheelhouse. I end up showing Rick how to do some of that stuff, and it can be long-winded for sure.
Yeah, Curtis actually has a layout where he's building at his house to be able to test all this stuff. So I need to drag out my old show layout and uh, reprogram my Sensor Station 3 to run that layout, which would be a big learning process, but
Yeah.
can't do that at this moment.
Okay, issues with contact tracks. When the wheels get dirty, they double trigger all the time. Yeah, you know what? When you get double triggers, oh boy, there's all kinds of ways that you can double trigger a track and solutions for it. Uh, Definitely clean wheels, clean track, even track beds help. You know, if you have sort of an uneven bench work, that's where your lines are not really parallel. And when you think about it, your trains have tension because they're pulling one another, and it's sort of like pulling the slack out of a piece of string. It could raise a tire, or it could raise a wheel up off your track. um,
Well,
I've had to use go
we've
ahead.
also seen contact tracks where the ends of the rails, the weight of the locomotive would or a heavy car would make the track bend down a little bit, and the ends of the rails would touch, even though you have insulators between the tracks, and that would cause a false trigger.
Yeah, cleaning, and you hit the nail on the head. Contact tracks with wheels get dirty. Wheels do get dirty, and sometimes they interfere with it, especially with bogies that have single axles. Um, I had a locomotive, a VT 11.5, and it had the single axles between the cars, and that caused. I only had one section of the layout where it would always derail, and I couldn't find a solution until I decided to use a secondary contact track to sort of indicate whether or not a train can clear or not. And I don't know if I can show it to you, so I'll try. Let me share the screen again. You can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what would happen was I had let's see, let's go into a track edit mode so you can kind of see that. So what happened was, on my layout, I had a turnout that had maybe like a contact track here, and the train is going from right to left this time. And what happened was that VT11 would always end up derailing because it would switch this turnout when the train was mid stride. So what I ended up doing as a solution was I actually added, let's say, another contact all the way out here, somewhere out in front of it. And how I ended up doing that was I ended up programming that if this was off, that meant that the train wasn't along this track far enough to clear this turnout. And once this was contact, then I would read back, make sure it was, like if it had occupation in both areas, then I knew that the train had cleared this turnout. So you may find creative solutions for it, and that was just one of the ones that I did. And I think I might even had to have had a second this contact track be on this turnout to ensure that it was cleared. So you could, let's say, use this as a departure, because what I had was this was my typical departure trigger, right? So unless the train was here to make contact as it cleared this, then it wouldn't give me this false trigger. But if the signal was, this contact was here, for instance, or didn't exist, I would get this thing going off and switching this train back and forth and derailing my train. So that's one way to look at it. Yeah. So cleaning the track. He's same issue. If there's under the staging yard or hidden under the table, many times it's hard to clean the track. Yeah, I feel you. I've had dirty track under there, and I think this new iteration, I made sure I had at least an arm's width so I can get my arm in there to clean the track. But the thing is, if you got to get under to add maybe like a second sensor, yeah, it's already a lot of work because you're getting under the track again.
Track cleaning cars.
Track cleaning cars can work. Let's see.
You're still sharing your screen.
Yeah. I'm just reading some of the questions. So are there newsletters with the macros? Yeah, I've written a lot of newsletters regarding this macro. It just kind of depends on which one you're looking for. And the thing is, I think the first time when I wrote those articles, I think they've been a lot harder to follow than sort of having an on-screen demonstration on how it does. So the webinars, I think, kind of help out at least seeing what's going on. I just kind of, the only thing lacking is a way to show where locomotives are traveling or where they are, because on the CS3 you don't really have a locomotive icon where you can display that sort of thing. But hopefully you get that. Hopefully they kind of go hand in hand. And again, we'll have these things posted, and we'll send out the postings for the new location for the live stream on YouTube so that you can view it afterwards, rather than just kind of trying to view it just through the live stream right now. They're available. So, what is a better and effective way to clean the track?
Here we go.
Go ahead, Rick.
Kerosene. Basically, kerosene, like we always say, kerosene is smoke fluid. The same as in the little jar or little bottle that you buy for $6. You can buy a quart of it for $15, and it's smoke fluid and track cleaner. So you don't slather it all over your track. Just put some on a rag and rub your track, or if you have a track cleaning car, you can put it on the pads and run it around. It doesn't take too much, and you'll be amazed at how clean it will get, or how much dirt will come off. So alcohol doesn't really work. You need something that's conductive, and that's what the kerosene does, is it keeps the rails conductive, where alcohol kind of gets them too clean and they don't conduct that well. So there you go.
All right. Let's see. I'm checking the software version.
2.2.0 parentheses 5.
And the Mobile Station 2, do you have that one? I don't have the Mobile Station 2.
2.113. At least I think that's correct for the central station. I just talked to somebody about it yesterday.
All right. Aldo, thanks. I'm glad you could make sense of the staging example. All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up. Appreciate you guys joining us.
Yeah.
Hopefully you get some information. One more question. What can you do about false triggers? No train on occupied track, yet it shows up as occupied. When you have an issue where there's no train on an occupied track, as much as you guys might resist this answer, check your wiring, check your insulators. I've seen insulators fall off. I've seen the tab underneath where I connected my spade connector get pushed up and make contact with the track. Those are all going to register as occupied. Other issues might be double check, make sure your configurations for your S88 is correct. Power is a weird issue. You got any kind of jumper thing that might actually cause that false trigger. I've done it, I've seen it, and it happens. I wish it was perfect the first time we do it, but not always. Like I said, I've had insulators fall off after I put the track together again. I've actually had them slip off after they've been working for a while. So I was having some weird track flexing going on, and I fixed all that stuff out. So that's it. Great. Again, thanks for joining us. Happy New Year, guys, by the way. Glad you could make it. Our topic for next month is, Rick.
Well, I was thinking about that, and I'm not entirely sure. I mean, hopefully we'll do it on the M decoder tool, but being that I have a Mac on my desktop and a PC on my laptop, it doesn't really like the Zoom webinar. Remember, Curtis? So we might
format on the web.
We might have to do a test and improvise, but so far that's what we're thinking.
Yep, we'll keep you apprised. There'll be an update on what we decide. Yeah, I guess we hadn't really kind of cleared it. And if you guys have anything maybe you want to talk about, we can also have a question and answer session, or you can, if there's anything pressing that you want. Again, I think the advanced scripting kind of gets deep in there, and we try to cover everybody to this point. But yeah, we'll see. I think the M Decoder tool sounds like a great idea if we can get some good video of it. Appreciate you guys again. Thanks for joining us. See, I think what's the date for our next webinar anyways?
That is February 10th, I believe. Let me pull it up.
The second week?
It's second Wednesday.
The second Wednesday would be the 10th.
Yes.
So I guess I keep saying goodbye, yet we're not hanging up. So,
yeah.
All right, guys. That wraps it up. Take care. Thanks again for joining us. I appreciate your comments and your questions, and we look forward to next month.